This man's identity is unknown. He was believed to be between 30 and 40 years old. He wore a white hood and was known only as the Phantom Killer.
There's no time.
The time is
13
o'clock.
Well, hey everybody, it's a rainy Saturday afternoon. We're sitting here with our special orange juice.
This is special orange juice?
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is special orange juice. It's got special medicinal properties.
That's right.
Yeah.
Aside from vitamin C.
Yeah.
And we're recording episode 95, another one of our popular true crime extravaganzas.
Yeah, which one is this?
We're actually doing The Phantom Killer.
The Phantom Killer.
Yes.
That was, remind me, which one was that?
Very famous uncaught serial killer from the 1940s.
Mm-hmm.
Wore a bag over his head with the shot couples in lovers' lanes. They made the movie about it, The Town That Dreaded Sundown.
Okay, yeah.
So they never did catch that guy. And probably...
The trombone killer.
Yes, although
that was just in the movie, though.
Yeah, that was just in the movie.
Yeah.
And I'll get into that a little bit, too. It's actually, the movie that was made, that Charles B. Pierce made, wasn't that inaccurate. I mean, they changed all the names of the victims, obviously, but other than that, the details were mostly accurate. There were a few places where, the trombone thing where it kind of went off the rails a little bit. But in general, it was fairly accurate to what really happened.
Yeah, and just off the top of my head, I think they actually had a couple of suspects isolated in this case.
They did, yeah.
So we'll get to that.
Yeah. Now, the first thing I want to do, I've got kind of a lot of shout outs or things I wanted to point out at the beginning of the show. Our latest movie review was Tourist Trap from 1979.
People seem to like it.
Which, yeah, that like I said on the show, it's like it had been requested a bunch of times. It was on the list.
Yeah.
We just hadn't gotten to it yet. And like somebody kept going, hey, when are you going to do Tourist Trap?
Yeah.
When are you going to do Tourist Trap?
I'm going to get that on Blu-ray.
So finally I was like, okay, we'll do it.
I'm going to get that one on Blu-ray. That one was pretty good. I want to see it again.
Because I really do like that movie.
There's more to it. I didn't pick up everything about that. You know what I mean? I think there was some stuff in there that I had.
Yeah. And I would, and like I said on the show, I think I would like it better if I saw it. So visually it looked better.
Right.
Because, we just saw the crappy VHS.
There's probably more in there whether or not he was doing that with psychokinesis or if, or if spirits were actually inside those mannequins,
Yeah.
There's probably there's probably some hints in there. I could probably figure them out.
And speaking of movies, if you guys listened to my solo review of Suspiria, where I decried the fact that they were going to make a remake of it, I actually saw the trailer for the remake, and it looks pretty fucking good. And this is very, very hard for me to admit because I love Suspiria. It's one of my favorite movies ever.
Now, you said it didn't have the colors, though.
Right. And also, I should note that I've been hearing, because I guess, I don't know if they just showed like a scene from it or if they showed the entire thing at a horror convention. From the scuttlebutt that's coming out of this convention, people are saying that it is fantastic and that it's like super, super, super gory, but also really, really scary, really eerie.
Will there be a theatrical release for it?
It should be. I think it's coming out this fall. I don't know when exactly. It just says fall 2018. So actually, as curmudgeonly as I was about it on the review, I actually have to admit that it looks pretty good. Okay. And I think I said this on my Suspiria review, but I was like, oh, well, if you remake Suspiria without all the primary colors and the crazy visuals, then it's not really Suspiria. But it looks like they did get an Italian director to do it. And it looks like he went in the totally opposite direction. He made it look very 70s period, but he used a very drab color scheme. Okay. And now that I'm seeing that, I'm like, that was the right decision.
So it worked out.
Yeah.
You think
because I think that if you had gone in the whole, I'm going to make it look like Dario's, I'm going to make it look like crazy primary colors, I think you would have left yourself open to accusations that you were just ripping off the original and why bother.
Right.
So it looks like he's trying to do his own thing with it while keeping true to the spirit of the original, which is all you can do really if if it has to be remade. But I will reserve judgment until I see it, but I'm going to say it actually does look really good, and I never thought I would say that.
Okay. Good.
So this fall, we're going to go see it.
All right.
All right. And the only other things I wanted to shout out, remember to go to our Zazzle store at zazzle.com/13 o'clock podcast. Is it just 13 o'clock podcast or just 13 o'clock? I can't remember, but it's one of those two things. And we have shirts and a tote bag. Also check out our Patreon account and our blog at 13o'clock podcast.wordpress.com if you would like to give us a PayPal donation, which someone named Greg did this past week.
Cool.
We actually recorded the show before. He gave us the donation like the day after we recorded the show, even though it was several days before we put it up, so I didn't get to put him on the last episode.
Cool, thanks,
But
Greg.
he's on this one, so thank you very much, Greg. Also, we've had some other fans like do some other stuff for us. Our fan Duncan actually started a subreddit for the 13 O'Clock podcast.
Okay.
He made me a moderator over there, or he invited me to become a moderator. And he has so far, he's put up like it looked like the first 13, 15 episodes.
Okay.
So he's doing like each episode at a time has its own little forum. So if you want to go over there and check that out, if you're into Reddit or whatever, then there is a board now there for you to discuss with other fans. Also, I think on the last episode we did about a haunting, which was last week's, you had asked that you wanted to hear some people's paranormal experiences. So I actually had two guys.
I asked them to send it in. They did.
Christopher and Liam, and they sent me their paranormal experiences. So if they're cool with it on next week's show, which will probably be another paranormal show, then I'll probably use their stories as kind of like the news or, because they were really interesting stories.
If you send us the stories, go ahead and confirm with us on, in the comments section.
I'm not going to like use your last name or anything like that, because I don't put like people's pictures in the YouTube videos if they don't say it's okay. I don't use their last names because I'm just assuming that, you don't want, there might be some weirdo out there that's like looking you up or whatever. So I just use people's first names generally. But yeah, so that's what I would do. I'm not going to like out or anything.
Right.
I also want to say, and this is really cool, this was actually sent to my Facebook author page, which is just Jenny Ashford author. And here was a guy named Brian, and he had just ordered a print copy of my book, The Faceless Villain. And he said that he was so excited about getting it that his little boy was like, "Can I take a picture of all of us with the book?" And then he took a picture of him, of him and the little boy with the book, and it was an adorable picture.
Yeah.
And he said that his son, I couldn't tell how old he was pretty little, and he said his son had just written his first chapter book.
Okay, cool.
And I was like, "Oh, that's awesome. I hope he like grows up and becomes a writer if that's what he really wants to do."
Yeah, cool.
If he needs advice when he gets a little bit older, just
you gonna put the
a
photo
shout.
all on screen?
No, because I don't want to do that because, like I said,
you don't have permission.
Yeah,
okay.
And like I said, and people, I don't like to put pictures of other people's kids, because you know how weird people are about that.
Okay.
And I would be weird about it too if it was my kid. So
Alrighty.
Okay, so what we're gonna do, this is sort of in lieu of a news story because it's not super current, but it's something that I kind of came across while I was researching a news story, and it's something that we've kind of touched upon a few times in some of our other true crime shows.
All right.
And this was what we perceived as the decline of serial killers.
Oh,
the decline of serial murder.
Right, yeah, I noticed that.
Yeah, and I wasn't sure if this was just something that we were perceiving or if this was something that was actually happening. And I came across, I guess there was a paper that came out in 2011, and it was called Extreme Killing, Understanding Serial and Mass Murder, and it was by a guy named James Allen Fox. Now, even though the paper came out in 2011, there were a lot of like think pieces written about it, like in the ensuing years. I found some from 2015, some from 2016, like Slate wrote one, they wrote a big long thing about it. And the interesting thing is that our perception was completely correct.
Yeah, I thought so.
The heyday of the serial killers was
gone.
The 70s and the 80s.
Yeah.
Now, here's the interesting thing.
At least in the United States.
At least in the United States. Yeah, this is not a worldwide phenomenon necessarily. This is just, we're talking about the U.S. In the 1970s, there were more than 500 serial murders in the United States. Not murderers, but serial murders, serial crimes.
Right.
The 1980s was the peak, just over 600 serial murders. In the 2000s, 2000 to 2009, there were 61 serial murders.
Dramatic drop.
Yes.
Right.
So this paper that this guy wrote was kind of trying to unpack the reasons for why that could be. One of the reasons he came up with, and is probably the most obvious reason, is that since, we have DNA now, we have more update, like technological advances in crime solving and things like that. Maybe we're catching people earlier before they can become serial killers. You don't get this thing where there's like years and years where they don't know who this dude is. Also, they speculate that maybe it's harder to find victims. Just because people tend to be more wary, they Google people before they date them. They're more suspicious and have means at their disposal for checking people out beforehand. So it might be harder to find victims, which I think we did kind of mention on our last show where we were talking about that. Now, there have been some exceptions. Obviously, we did a show about the Long Island serial killer who actually used Craigslist to target victims, but the paper says that that's actually not as common as you would think it was. I mean, you would think because of relative anonymity and things and, escorts particularly working on Craigslist, you'd think that would make it very easy for someone to target killers, but apparently that is not the case. And they're also saying that it could be because serial killers just are not romanticized in the media. I don't necessarily want to use the romanticized.
Yeah, because I don't think they ever were.
No, they weren't romanticized, but they're not, it's not as prevalent in the media as it used to be.
There isn't a media anymore. There's just online, and that's everything.
Well, true. And I do think people's interests have definitely become more, niche. Right. Where you can pretty much just see what you want to see. And so it's not a thing where people are consuming the same newspapers, consuming the same news, and they're all saying stories about Ted Bundy or John Wayne Gacy or the Zodiac or whatever. So the whole country is kind of gripped in this panic. You don't really see that as much anymore because it's just
everything's
the media is
diffused.
It's not as generalized. Right. And it could be too that because it's not as generalized, people don't necessarily go that route when they want easy fame. Although the paper did point out that although serial killings are far less common, mass shootings are a lot more prevalent.
Well, that's because they're being promoted. Basically, they're just shown over and over again.
That's kind of the point that they're making is that
if you look at these school shooter kids, they're all kind of that same profile. Like that one that shot up the school here in Florida just a few months back. They actually released a video that he took of himself, and when you see that dude talking, you go, "Yeah, it's the same dork like those other dorks." Yeah, they're just incels basically.
And it's the same kind of thing. It's that's a very similar profile, and this is like a way for, like we said, powerless dudes to feel like they have some power.
They saw one dork do it, so then they're gonna go do it.
So I mean, although like we said, violent crime in general has been declining precipitously since the 90s.
No matter what they say, it's actually declined a lot.
You just hear about it more.
I was talking to some young kids, well, not really young kids, but people in their 20s. To us, that's like young kids now. They're talking about how violent today is, and I'm like, dude, you don't know what you're talking about.
Well, everybody says that about every era.
Yeah, they don't know what they're talking about. The 70s and the 80s were just off the chain.
It was
in the United States.
Worse.
Yeah.
Way worse.
Yeah.
It's weird because I think the problem is nowadays, like I said, is oversaturation. You just hear about stuff a lot more than you did back in the day. So it seems like it's everywhere, even if it's actually not occurring as often.
Yeah, they'd kill people in some little area, axe up 4 people, and it would only make the local news.
Yeah.
Wouldn't even make the national news.
Right.
Back in the newspaper day,
Yeah, because why would anybody... I mean, like I said, and this was a problem that I came... Well, it's not a problem necessarily, but that I've been coming across as I'm researching the second volume of my book, is that a lot of these unsolved murders, even when they were super gruesome or super crazy, even if it was a serial killer, even if it was like several related murders in one area... It didn't really go beyond the bounds of the town that it was in. I mean, I discovered a whole series of crazy murders in Ontario that happened in the late 60s, and you never hear about it.
Right. It was just local news.
It was just kind of local news.
It wasn't even state
news. And I
news.
keep finding this, particularly in the 50s and 60s. It was a very common problem. So, nowadays it's like something happens in buttfuck Egypt, Arkansas.
Everybody knows about it. Yeah, they know about it in Europe. Oh my God, those Americans.
So it seems so it seems like it's a lot more prevalent just because you're hearing about it more. I think that's the only problem. But I'm just
going to go as far to say that the conditions are no longer correct for creating serial killers for one reason or another. And I actually going to stick to my leaded fuel theory.
That, you know what, like I said, I don't think I've ever seen anybody brought that up, but that might be...
They're putting lead inside gasoline. All right, well, it's supposed to quiet the valves, to keep your valves tapping.
Right.
And to help seal valves on top of an old motor. Well, coming out of that exhaust pipe's a bunch of little lead particles, and they're blowing around and collecting
Everybody's
up.
Just
breathing
them in.
Right, and all the cities are just got these little microscopic little particles of lead everywhere. They're breathing that in. And, leaded fuel started to be phased out in the 80s.
Yeah.
Right along with the decline of all that stuff.
Yeah, because look at all the brain damage and stuff like that little kids would get, like from eating leaded paint and stuff.
Look how crazy Romans were.
For
drinking out of lead pipes and eating off of lead plates.
Yeah.
They did crazy stuff. It lowers your IQ. It makes you very violent. Yeah, it makes you crazy.
Well,
it's
it takes away it takes away inhibitions. Yeah, because it messes with your frontal lobe to an extent. So even though I'm not sure breathing it in obviously is probably not as harmful as say eating it, like if it was lead paint, but I'm sure it has an effect. So there might be, I mean, that might not be the main issue.
Might have been a contributing factor.
Right, but that might have been a contributing factor because I think most of the factors are probably cultural, you know, having to do with how we do police work nowadays and things, but you know, I definitely think that could probably be some kind of environmental factor.
The United States was going through a lot of transitions at that time. It was like transitional period from a pretty religiously dominated country to a more secular country. Imagine if you took Saudi Arabia and made it a secular country overnight. And there'd be a lot of problems. You know what I mean? There'd be a lot of
because any kind of change is going to cause social upheaval because some people aren't going to like it, some people are going to like it, and there's going to be a lot of conflict between those two things.
The United States was kind of like one long social upheaval, really, through the whole thing. Civil wars, foundations of new states, conquering territories.
And again, the reason why so many killers, probably serial killers, peaked in like late 60s to mid 80s was because we were coming out of the whole cultural revolution of the late 60s and, there was so much upheaval there.
We forget about all the religious strife, about all the different types of Protestantism. That was fighting each other. And Catholics. And here in the United States, we don't think about it today. But
it's funny. It's really not even on the radar.
But in the 1800s, that was a big deal.
Well, yeah. But so that was something that I thought was kind of interesting because it kind of went back to what we were talking about. We were probably talking about our Golden State Killer show. Yeah. But I just thought it was interesting that I discovered something that was talking about the very thing we were talking about. So I love when that happens. All right, so let's get to the main topic, which is about the infamous Phantom Killer, also known as the Moonlight Murderer, or the Texarkana Moonlight Murders, sometimes it's called. They usually call it that because there's a perception that that the murders, well, not even a perception, it kind of was, but the murders were 3 weeks apart. Okay. Like phases of the moon or whatever.
Like the phases of the moon, right.
Right. Now, I actually wrote about this case in the first volume of The Faceless Villain. It's also been requested several times. And this is something I kind of wanted, even though it's kind of a well-known case, it's something that I kind of wanted to get into. And I think it's kind of an interesting, he has like a lot of parallels with the Zodiac, really. I mean, he targeted the same kind of people. He had a hood. He had the same kind of thing. Yeah. He didn't really, it wasn't like a taunting the police type situation, but you can see where maybe Zodiac could have got the idea. Now, the interesting thing about this is that if you guys have seen the documentary, we saw it, I think it's on Netflix still, it's called Killer Legends. Yeah. Remember we saw that where it was those two people and they were exploring it was like 4 or 5 different urban legends and they were trying to trace back where they came from. Now they made this statement on there, I can't remember how definitively they stated this, but they said that they thought that the urban legend of the Hook, everybody knows the story of the Hook, going out to the lovers' lanes and, there's an escaped mental patient and, we got to get out of here right away. And then there's a hook on the door handle and whatnot. That actually that might have been inspired by the Phantom Killer. Now, I looked it up, and while the Wikipedia page about this urban legend doesn't make that specific association, I will note that the legend of the Hook did not become prevalent until the mid to late 50s, which was about 10-15 years after the Phantom Killer murders. Okay. The first mention of the Hook urban legend was actually in a Dear Abby column from 1960. Where someone was repeating it as a supposedly true story, which is the definition of an urban legend happened to a friend of a friend. But so it's possible that it could be, even though there's no hook involved in this, it's possible you can see where the idea of it could have come from. So this started in 1946. This was an unapprehended serial killer. They still have not much idea who he is. His reign of terror only lasted about 4 months, and then he never killed again. So now, the first people to be attacked, and this was Friday, February 22nd, 1946. So you got Jimmy Hollis, he's 25, and his girlfriend, Mary Jean Larry, who is 19. They've gone to the movies, and then after the movies, they're going to go out and park. Like people did back in the old days, they park and make out. So they go to a lover's lane. They've only been sitting in the car for about 10 minutes. Then someone comes up to the driver's side window and shines a flashlight into the window. Yeah. Jimmy can't really see.
They think it's a cop, probably.
Yeah, he didn't really think anything of it. He just thought it was a joke or, this is maybe somebody that has mistaken me for someone else or whatever. Now, the guy says, get out of the car. So they both get out, like I said, possibly thinking it's a cop. And then they see that it's a guy with a hood and he's pointing a pistol at them.
Well, that does sound kind of like the Zodiac, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's what I mean. This might have been where Zodiac got the idea because there's a lot of parallels. So the guy says to them, okay, do what I say and I won't hurt you.
Yeah.
Then he says to Jimmy, quote, take off your fucking britches, he says.
Damn.
So Mary Jean tells Jimmy, she's like, just do what he says. It's, it'll be fine. He just wants money or whatever. So then Jimmy does what he's told. He takes off his pants and then the guy cracks Jimmy in the head. They're not sure if he did it with the pistol butt or if he had something else.
Maybe he did it with a flashlight.
Yeah, it could have been the flashlight or he could have had some other thing. Now, Mary Jean said that his head getting hit was so loud that she thought the guy had shot him. That's how loud it was, yeah. So then she tries to reason with the guy. She says, look, we don't have any money. It's like, just leave us alone or whatever. The man said, you're lying. Yes, you do. And then he knocked her to the ground also. She said she didn't know what it was, but it felt like an iron pipe. He then told her to get up off the ground and start running, which she did.
Yeah.
She starts running in one direction. He's like, no, not that way. Go that way.
Yeah.
So she's like, okay, whatever. So she runs and then she hears Jimmy getting the shit beat out of him like behind her and she is freaking out.
Right.
She sees a car and she goes up to it thinking someone's in there for help, but it's empty.
His car, probably.
That's what I was thinking. It was probably the car that he drove there, but she didn't know. So now she had high heels on, like I said, so she wasn't running very fast. The guy caught up with her and then he says to her, why are you running? She says, because you told me to. Mm-hmm. And then he accused her of lying again, knocks her on the ground, and then proceeds to sexually assault her with the barrel of the pistol.
Okay. Wow.
At which point she kind of throws him, she fights him and throws him off and then just says, you know what? Just kill me. If you're going to do that, just kill me. But then at this point, I think that a car pulled up and they saw some headlights. So the guy ran off. So she runs to a house and gets help. An ambulance comes. Jimmy is actually still alive. His skull has been fractured in 3 places, but he was okay enough that he could kind of get to his feet and he flagged down a car and they called him an ambulance. So both of these two survived.
Yeah, they got lucky.
Right. The later ones would not be so lucky. But these two did survive. Now, because the whole situation, they hadn't got a good look at the dude, obviously. She said Mary Jean had seen him, but he had what looked like, she said it was either a pillowcase or some kind of a white sack over his face that just had little holes cut out for the eyes and mouth, and that's it. Now, Jimmy said, well, okay, he was about 6 feet tall, which Mary Jean also said. Jimmy thought that he was maybe a tanned white dude.
Right.
Mary Jean thought that he was maybe a light-skinned black man, but neither of them could tell. They can only see his hands and hear his voice, so they couldn't really tell. And Mary Jean she said something about when the police were questioning her about it, she later said that she thought the police were trying to get her to admit that she knew who he was. Right. She said, but that is not the case. We did not know this was just a random dude.
Yeah, the cops thought that maybe it was a setup of some sort. That she was in on it.
Either that. Well, and the thing too is that because this had happened, and like I said, if I didn't mention it before, this was 1946. This was in Texarkana, Texas. If you're not from here, it's right on the border between Texas and Arkansas.
Yeah.
So at first, the police, I mean, they took it seriously, obviously, but they treated it as an isolated incident, that maybe it was a robbery or an attempted rape, and they didn't really expect, I mean, they didn't think
it was going to be random either.
Right. They didn't really think of it as random, and there was really no such thing as like serial killer profiling. I mean, nobody came up and said, oh, this sounds like a serial killer in the making or anything like that. Well, obviously they were 100% wrong about that. So skip ahead to March 23rd. Here we have Richard Griffin, who was 29. He had a girlfriend named Polly Ann Moore, who was 17. About 10 p.m., they're having dinner with his sister and the sister's boyfriend at some cafe, like outside of Texarkana. And after they finish their dinner, they kind of go off in their separate ways. And then Richard and Polly Ann disappear. The next morning, which was a Sunday morning, there's a guy and he's driving past this place called Rich Road, which was kind of an unpaved lover's lane again. He saw a 1941 Oldsmobile that looked like 2 people were sleeping in it. So he goes up and looks in there and sees that both of them have been shot in the head.
Damn.
So he calls the police. Now, Richard Griffin, they found him, he was kneeling between the front seats of the car. Okay. His pockets had been turned inside out. His head was resting on his hands. He had been shot twice. Both times in the back of the head, I think, or in the back of the head and once in the neck or something of that nature. Polly Ann was in the back seat face down. She was shot in the back of the head, although she wasn't shot in the car. Police thought that, there was blood outside of the car on the car's running board. So they thought that whoever had taken her out of the car, forced her out of the car, shot her, and then put her back in the back seat. Yeah. So she wasn't shot inside the car. Now, both of the victims were fully clothed. the sad thing was that Polly Ann Moore, I mean, considering the later crimes, she was probably raped.
Yeah.
But they took her to the coroner like almost immediately without really checking any of that. So by the time they got through all of the postmortem and everything, I'm assuming, because everything I've read about the case said that they never determined whether she had been raped. But I assume that it is a likelihood.
Yeah, according to the evidence that you're describing.
Yeah.
The guy was shot in the front seat, all right? The girl was raped outside and then killed outside and then dumped into the car.
Right, that's
he
what
didn't
I'm
want.
thinking.
He didn't want to rape the girl with the dead guy in the front seat.
Right. Now, they did find there was a blanket inside the car, and it had a .32 caliber cartridge shell. They thought this had come from a Colt automatic pistol.
Okay, so it's a very small pistol cartridge.
Yeah. Now, they thought that robbery might have been part of the motive since they didn't find any money either in Polly Ann's purse or in his pockets. And as I said, the pockets had been turned inside out. So they're assuming, again, that, maybe it's a random robbery and they just shot the people. And like I said, they didn't determine whether Polly Ann had been raped or not. So at this stage, I don't really think, they did kind of not really link the two crimes, even though obviously they're very similar. It's easy to kind of Monday morning quarterback and look back and go, well, obviously this is the same perpetrator. They did pretty much the exact same as a Lover's Lane. It was a couple. They were sitting in a car. Someone approached them with a gun. But at this stage still, it doesn't seem like they were like, serial killer. So they're questioning suspects, over 200 people at one point, but all were eventually cleared. A few days after the murder, about 4 days afterward, they approached the Texarkana Gazette, the main newspaper in town, and pretty much asked the public for help. If anybody saw anything, can you please help us out? We're really in the weeds here, pretty much. So they're still working on this crime. And then about 3 weeks later, just like clockwork, there was another one.
Right. So he's doing it in 3-week increments, more or less.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
Now, I guess since we're kind of at the halfway point right now, so maybe I'll stop here and then we'll go to the next case. And then, because there's other stuff. I want to get into the Phantom Killer, the rest of the Phantom Killer murders, kind of the suspects. And then I want to get into a little bit into the movie, The Town That Dreaded Sundown, and where it deviated from the actual crime. And I also want to talk, if I have time, I want to talk a little bit about the disappearance of Virginia Carpenter, which is sometimes linked in with this crime. Okay, so we're going to take a break right now. We'll be back in just a few minutes.
Kick back and listen to some commercials.
All right, now we're back. So this is the second week of April. It's April 13th, 1946. There's a girl named Betty Jo Booker. She's 15. She plays saxophone, not trombone, in a band that plays at the VFW every Saturday night. So this is a Saturday night, and she's playing at the VFW with her band. They're called the Rhythmaires, just like she does every Saturday night. Now, ordinarily, Betty Jo would get a ride home with either the band leader or one of the other guys in the band. They would usually give her a ride home after the gig. But on this particular Saturday, she was actually getting a ride home from her friend Paul Martin, who was 16. And they were not a couple, but he was an old friend of hers. She'd known him since kindergarten. He had moved away, but he was visiting back in town. So she kind of felt obligated to hang out with him. So he was going to pick her up. Now, he was actually supposed to pick her up from the gig at 1 a.m., and then he was supposed to take her to her friend's house because her friend was having a slumber party.
Okay.
Well, the night goes on, and she leaves. He picks her up, obviously, but they never turn up at the slumber party. So the next morning, about 6 o'clock in the morning, one of the girls that was at the slumber party calls the band leader, whose name was Jerry Atkins, and was like, hey, where's Betty Jo? She was supposed to come to my party and she didn't come.
Right.
And Jerry was like, oh, well, I think it was the other band members' turn to drive her home, so maybe you should call him or call her parents or whatever. So, he's like, because I didn't see her. So about half an hour after this phone call, there's this family, the Weavers, and they're driving down this road and they see a body on the side of the road.
Dang.
And it's a teenage boy. He's just laying there. And this is Paul Martin. He had been shot 4 times. Once in the back, once through the hand, once through the nose, and once through the back of the neck.
Let me guess, 32 caliber.
It was, yeah.
Yeah.
So at this stage, they see him. They're like, well, that's Paul Martin. Where's Betty Jo? So they get a search party together and they fan out in all directions. Took about 4 hours to find her. She was about 2 miles away. She was shot twice, actually, once in the chest, once in the face. Like you said, both victims shot with a .32 caliber Colt automatic pistol. Mm-hmm. Betty Jo was found fully clothed, but had been raped. They found that out at the post-mortem. That's why I'm saying that Polly Ann Moore probably was as well. So half a mile away from where Paul Martin's body was found, they found his car with the keys still in it. They never could figure out which one of them was killed first. Right. But she was actually kind of far away from the car, so she had obviously been taken some distance. Unlike the movie, The Town That Dreaded Sundown, which showed Betty Jo Booker getting killed with her own trombone that had like a knife on the end of the... Yeah. What is that slidey part of the trombone called?
I don't know. The slide. I think it is called the slide.
Is it called the slide? Okay.
I think it might be.
I'm sure it has a name, but that is actually...
Well, it's called a slide trombone, so that's probably the slide.
Yeah. Right. That's not the case. She was a saxophone player, and actually they didn't find her saxophone until much later. So they didn't even recover it from the scene. It wasn't there. And actually that was one of the main clues that they used at the beginning to try to solve the murder, is that because her saxophone was not found and they knew that she had left with it, the musical instrument had a serial number. So they gave the serial number to all the pawn shops and shit like that in the area to see if someone came in and tried to pawn it. And at this stage, this is when the Texas Rangers get involved, the state police got involved, the city police got involved, because now they finally understand that this is a serial killer. This is someone that's targeting couples in cars, and they kind of need to get off their asses and get this shit together. And this is also the stage where the media, I believe it was the Texarkana Gazette, the editor of the Texarkana Gazette, that gave the killer the name the Phantom Killer.
Okay.
Because, they're all going by the first description of him that Mary Jean Larry gave, because she was really the only one that got a good look at him. Nobody else did. Everybody else was dead. Now, interestingly, concerning the saxophone that Betty Jo Booker had, so April 25th, which was only a little more than a week after Betty Jo Booker and Paul Martin got killed, this guy walks into a pawn shop in Corpus Christi and he says, hey, do you want to buy an alto saxophone? He didn't have it with him, but he asked the girl at the music store, do you want to buy one? And she said, oh, well, I'll have to ask my manager. Right. Now, she said at this stage, the guy got very agitated and was like, well, why do you have to ask your manager? And so she said, well, I just have to. And so she went to call the manager and then the guy left. Right. Now, they did track down this guy 2 days later. They found him in a hotel in Corpus Christi. Someone had spotted him trying to buy a .45 at a pawn shop. Right. Now, they didn't find the saxophone. He didn't have it. They did find in his hotel room, there was a bag of bloody clothes that looked like his clothes, but that had blood on them. Right. Now, he said he'd been in a bar fight. Right, yeah, here we go. Which is what they all say. But the more they questioned this guy, they pretty much determined that wasn't him. As suspicious as he seemed. Okay, he didn't seem to be linked to these murders. Right, he didn't seem to be linked to that. Not saying he wasn't a sketchy motherfucker, but... It's weird. Aside from this being the 1940s, this is a very textbook case kind of serial killer activity. Yeah. It's pretty much, Berkowitz, Zodiac,
What's the other one that was kind of like this? Starkweather was a little bit like the kind of, though he had a female
Although more a
accomplice.
spree killer.
More a spree killer.
Starkweather.
Yeah, he seems generic at this point. Very generic. It's just that he's kind of he's an early motorized serial killer. That's how I'd classify this.
That's actually a good way of putting it, because this is kind of, I mean, the 40s were kind of the dawn of the American car culture.
Yeah.
And it was kind of, you got your highway system first kind of coming to fruition.
Right.
You got most people after the war being able to afford cars.
Yeah.
And so, like you said, it's almost like the first guy that's like driving around
doing it.
targeting people in their own cars.
Right. Prior to this, you had Jack the Ripper type guys that walked around and stabbed hookers. Yeah. Basically.
Or stabbed farm families, or killed them with axes.
Exactly. You had a lot of that. This is a guy who drives around hunting victims, seemingly teenage couples, steals what he can from them, but I think the motive is rape.
Probably.
I don't think the motive is robbery. It's rape.
No. Even though, I mean, some of the victims were robbed, but some of them weren't. And it might have been just like a case of opportunity, like, oh, they got some money hanging out, I might as well take that. I don't think that was the motivation.
The first few is him trying to build up his, confidence. And then once he's confident with it, he eventually goes for the gold, which was the girls, the rape. Yeah. That's what he's doing.
Because this is a very common pattern that you see with serial killers. Their first few attempts don't work out, like I said, and that was the case in this. They got beat up. She got sexually assaulted, not raped, penetrative raped, but he did penetrate her with another object.
He was too nervous. He couldn't rise to the occasion.
Right, exactly.
Couldn't get it up.
And he did beat them. Right. She was beaten also. Yeah. She had a big cut on her face and things, but he didn't kill them.
Yeah, he wasn't there for that. He was there to rape that girl.
Yeah, and I do feel like that's definitely... So, like I said, even though it's never been determined whether the second woman, Polly Ann Moore, was raped, I assume that she probably was.
I'm going to say we don't know who this guy is yet. You haven't really painted out the suspect, but I'm going to say 20s. That's what I'm going to say so far, but we'll see. Sounds like the crime of a man in his 20s, mid-20s.
Now, the weird thing, so the guy that went to the pawn shop and tried to pawn the saxophone, he was actually in police custody until May 3rd, at which point they released him because they didn't think he had any connection to the crimes. Now, on May 3rd, this was when the Phantom Killer struck for what was presumably the last time. These are the last two canonical crimes, one of which was a murder, one of the victims survived. But this was actually almost like, and like I said, this is another thing you see patterns with serial killers. It was like an escalation because he, this time, did not target a couple in a car. He targeted a couple in their house.
He was getting more and more bold.
This was actually Virgil Starks, who was a farmer. He was 37. Yeah. He and his wife, Katie, lived on this 500-acre farm, and it was kind of outside of town, so it wasn't really in that close to where the other murders were committed. So it's the night of May 3rd. The couple is at home. Katie gives her husband, he had a bad back, so she gave him a heating pad, and he kind of sat in his little comfy chair in the living room and turned on the radio to listen to his show, and he had his paper, and he was sitting there. And she goes in the bedroom to lay down. Then Katie hears something in the backyard, and she yells out to Virgil, "Hey, turn the radio down so I can see what that is. I think I heard somebody." Then from the living room, she hears glass breaking. Now, she didn't think anything bad at first. She thought, oh, well, Virgil just dropped something and broke it. Mm-hmm. So she goes out to the living room. She sees her husband stand up from his chair, and then he falls back down, like he slumps back down into the chair.
Bullet hole in him.
So she runs up to him and looks, and there's 2 bullet holes in the back of his head, and then she looks, and the window 3 feet behind him has 2 bullet holes in it.
Yeah, he shot through the window and got him.
Yeah, so she flips out, she runs to the phone, calls the police, and then the killer shoots her right in the face. Yeah. One of the bullets, it went through the side of her face. Yeah. And it came out behind her ear. And then the other one hit her underneath the jaw. Yeah. It blew her lips out and a bunch of her teeth. Right. So her face is just like covered in blood.
Yeah, but what's strange is that's usually non-lethal.
It was in this case. Yeah, because she did live.
Yeah, because the brain is above all that. Yeah. You can shoot the face off.
So she got twice in the face. And then she said that she saw the guy trying to climb in the window. So she ran the fuck out of that house. And there's just blood everywhere. She's like teeth are falling out of her mouth.
32 actually doesn't do a whole lot of damage. It's a small and pointed bullet. Makes a wound wound very similar to an ice pick most of the time. It looks like an ice pick wound, but good penetration. Blew her teeth out, though.
Yeah.
Little pieces of teeth and stuff.
Yep.
I've seen calibers like that, 380, what it does to little animals and things, growing up.
So she was actually able to run out of the house. She ran down the street to her neighbor's house. The neighbor called the police, and she actually did survive. Now, when the police went into the house, Virgil Starks had been killed outright. Not funny. The ironic thing was that the heating pad that he'd had behind him had actually caught the chair that he was sitting in on fire.
Damn.
So they had to put that out. But he died. She actually survived. Although she didn't get a very good look at him. He had a mask on. She said she just saw a dark form like coming in the window and then got the fuck out of the house, as you would. Now, when you were saying about a 32, these two were actually shot with a 22 rifle.
So the guy that got shot in the back of the head and the face, it was a 22 rifle?
Yeah.
Okay. Both real common in the 40s. Super common. Cheap and plentiful. Small, high-quality 32 automatic pistols were super, super plentiful in the 40s and the 50s, even up into the 60s. It was a really practical caliber, and the pistols were cheap, well-built, and accurate. And, of course, 22 rifles were just everywhere. All over the United States. They're all over the United States today. That's just your standard ranch gun. You could get a good one for $100 today, used.
There was some speculation about whether this crime had been committed by the same perpetrator just because the weapon was different and the method was different.
Yeah.
But in general, this is considered the last of the Phantom Killer murders.
Yeah. He gave up, though. He didn't go in there and get her.
Yeah, well, she ran out, and I guess he probably figured. Now, the only thing, they did recover some fingerprints from the scene. There were some partial bloody footprints that were presumably left by the killer.
It makes sense, though. If the motive was rape, why the hell would you want to rape a girl who had her face blown off? Probably why you let her go.
Now, he did not rob this house. Apparently, this farm family, they had a lot of money, a lot of cash on hand in the house.
Yeah.
And it wasn't hidden or anything, but he didn't take anything from the house, it didn't look like. And the only thing, like I said, they got fingerprints, they got some footprints. They actually found a red and black flashlight he had abandoned outside of the window that Virgil was shot through.
Well, I guess he figured that she was going to go run for help, so he better get the hell out of there. So he better
take off, because, the police would be coming soon, so yeah. Now, at this stage, even though the movie, The Town That Dreaded Sundown, pretty much after the first set of 2 murders, the whole town flipped the fuck out and everyone was doing this. But in reality, it didn't really happen until after the Starks murders. Okay. Kind of in between the third set of murders and the Starks murders. Then the whole town started flipping out. The police gave a midnight curfew. People were buying guns and guard dogs and yard lights and fences and new locks and all this other stuff. People were booby trapping their houses.
Yeah.
There were a bunch of teenagers who thought they'd be superheroes, and they took to staking out lovers' lanes. They'd arm themselves and just sit in lovers' lanes. Trying to get the killer to come out and or try to attack him so they could shoot him. Now, the police did that also. They did that too, but the killer never took this bait.
He sounds like a drifter, if you ask me. This sounds like a drifter. A guy who was only in town for a little while anyway.
It might have been,
They were on a job or something,
and
then left.
Now, during the investigation, as I said, Virgil and Katie Starks were the last ones that were attacked that they know of. There were a couple of weird little things that went on. Now, a few days after this, about 4 days after the Starks were attacked, they found a man named Earl McSpadden, and he was found lying on the railroad tracks dead about 16 miles north of Texarkana. His arm and leg had been cut off, I guess, by the train, but police thought that he might have been murdered before the train came, that he was dead for 2 hours and then somebody left him on the track, to make it look like that. There's still kind of rumors in Texarkana that Earl McSpadden might have been the Phantom and that he committed suicide by jumping in front of a train. Or some people consider Earl McSpadden the 6th victim of the Phantom. That has never been determined.
Doesn't fit the MO,
Yeah, that really doesn't sound like the same kind of thing.
I bet it's unrelated.
There were also a couple of weird things. Now, also on the same day, this was 4 days after the Starks murder, May 7th, a man named Herbert Thomas comes to the police and he says, I was driving and this guy came up to me who was hitchhiking. He said, hey, I have to go to Henderson, which was a nearby town. He said, I'll give you $5. My mom is very sick and I have to go see her. The guy gets in the car. He drives the guy to Henderson. And then the guy pulls out a pistol and says, keep on driving or I'll kill you just like I killed those people in Texarkana.
Right.
So now this guy that's talking to the police, he says the guy said Betty Jo Booker's name and Paul Martin's name.
Yeah. It sounds like a boast.
Yeah, and said, oh, I'm not done killing. I'm still going to kill more people. Then he takes back the $5. He takes another $3 that the driver had, and then he says, okay, don't follow me. I'm going to kill you.
It sounds like a guy just bragging.
But then, so he lets the guy out, and then later on that night, another guy in the town where he dropped him off said that he saw like a prowler around his house that had the same kind of description. So I don't know if this was the same guy or if it was just somebody showing off or what.
It doesn't sound right to me. You got the perpetrator, first of all, he had to have his own transportation. He had his own car. He's very careful. He's committed, maybe 6 homicides at least, and nobody's seen him and he's getting away. He wouldn't be bragging about that. The guy who committed all those murders was stealthy and kept his mouth shut. I think he was a drifter a bit.
Yeah, it could be.
A guy in his 20s probably.
And like I said, there were a couple other weird things. Like there was this guy named Ralph Bauman. He got arrested in L.A. on May 23rd, and he said that he woke up from a coma on May the 3rd, and he couldn't remember anything that had happened before that. And he said, now I've been hearing all this stuff about the phantom killer suspect, this hitchhiker who had red hair and kind of looked like this guy looked. And he's like, and I'm wondering if it's me because I don't remember anything that happened. So he turned himself into police. Yeah. But the police determined that he had actually been discharged from the army because of mental problems. Yeah, right. And that there was probably no connection. Now, here, though, is where this guy is kind of the prime suspect. So, June 28th, 1946, there's this police officer from Arkansas, Max Tackett. And he sees a car parked in a parking lot that was reported stolen on the same night that Richard Griffin and Polly Ann Moore were murdered.
Okay, this is sounding promising.
So he says, okay, well, I'm going to sit here and see who gets in this car. Right. Who gets in the car was a 21-year-old woman, and her name is Peggy Swinney. Okay. So he arrests her. He's like, obviously, this is a stolen car. Now, it turned out that Peggy had just married a guy named Ewell Swinney. Both of them were car thieves. Okay. After they are both taken into custody for stealing this car, Peggy says to the police, yeah, Ewell Swinney's a car thief. Oh, also, he's the phantom killer. Huh. So Ewell says...
Why would she give up that information?
Right. Here's the thing. Now, there are two schools of thought about this. Now, Ewell Swinney, when he was getting arrested for the car theft, he did say some kind of weird things that made the police think that maybe. He said stuff like, when the police were arresting, well, the first thing he said, when they were arresting him for stealing the car, the first thing he said was, don't shoot me. And the cop was like, we're not going to shoot you just for stealing a car. It's not that big a deal. We're just arresting you. But then he would say stuff like, I know you're playing with me. You're arresting me for more than car theft. Am I going to get the chair? Okay. He would say stuff like that. So it sounded very incriminating. Right. So that gave some people pause. Now, Peggy thought that he was the phantom killer. Apparently, some of her relatives also thought that he was the phantom killer. He admitted that he had once owned a .32 Colt automatic pistol, although he had since lost it in a craps game. They always seem to lose them in card games. Yeah, yeah. People tend to... They're always betting guns in card games, like you do. Now, it should be noted that Ewell Swinney never admitted to any of those crimes. Right. He was open about the car theft.
Well, car theft in the 40s wasn't a huge penalty for, not like today. In the United States, grand theft auto can bring 10 years. Yeah. Depending on the states. Back in those days, you're probably lucky to get 5 months for something like that. 90 days.
What eventually ended up happening, because here's the thing, like I said, Ewell Swinney is still considered, even now, considered the prime suspect. Even though Peggy Swinney, the wife, she thought he was the phantom killer, but the more they interviewed her, they were like, she seems like a habitual liar. Right. She wasn't super compelling as a witness. And at any rate, evidently the laws at the time, and I'm not sure if it's still the same in that state, but husbands and wives couldn't testify against one another. Right. You know what I mean? Because there was conflict of interest or whatever. So she wouldn't have been able to take the stand against him anyway, even if they did try him for that. Now, they also determined, one, the fingerprints that were found at the scene of the Virgil Starks murder did not match Ewell Swinney's fingerprints. Right. They also were able to determine that on the night of at least one of the murders, both Ewell and Peggy Swinney were probably in San Antonio.
So they're just liars, really.
So I'm not really sure. I mean, there
doesn't sound right.
Now, like I said, there was some other circumstantial evidence, though. Now, the car that they found Peggy Swinney in, obviously, was a car that had been stolen the same night that Polly Ann Moore and Richard Griffin were, showing that they were in that town.
But it wasn't stolen from a victim, though.
No, but it was stolen, so that put them in the town.
It's coincidence, I bet you.
But there was also the weird shit he said about when he got arrested, oh, we're going to get the chair, blah, blah, blah. Also, Peggy, she actually seemed to know some things about the crime scenes that weren't common knowledge. Like, she actually went with some of the officers to one of the crime scenes and said, oh yeah, I walked over here. And they said, oh, well, we did find like a woman's high-heeled footprints over here, and we didn't tell the media that.
Nah, I'm suspicious.
Yule Swinney's room, like his bedroom, they found a work shirt, and it was a khaki work shirt, and it had a laundry mark on it that said Stark, which was, similar to the last name of one of the victims. It also had something like some kind of slag in the pocket that matched some slag from the Virgil Starks' welding shop.
Huh.
So there was that. But like I said, there was the thing about fingerprints not matching. During one or two of the murders, they were probably in another town.
It doesn't really jive up with me, because these crimes are actually the crimes of a single male.
Yeah.
That's usually who's overwhelmingly, that's who's going to be doing this. It's going to be a loner.
Yeah.
A loner type male. He's not going to have a girlfriend. And so I don't think these two did that.
Now, interestingly, I was watching something that came out because The Town That Dreaded Sundown, the original movie, which was directed by Charles B. Pierce of Legend of Boggy Creek fame, that actually came out in the 70s, 1976, I believe it was. Now, they did a remake of it in 2014, 2016, I want to say. Right around that time that came out, there was a book that came out about the Phantom Killer. And the book was written by a guy named John Presley, who was actually the nephew of one of the main investigators on the case. Now, he thinks that Yule Swinney was the Phantom Killer. And he's been researching it for a long time.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to shit on, because I don't know as much about the case as him, obviously. But he thinks, and there's also a criminal profiler that they talked to on this same documentary that I saw, that also thinks that it was him.
Well, they know more about the case than I do. I mean, I'm just hearing about it right now. It just sounds like the work of a single male. That's just what it looks, Why would a guy...
he had only recently married, though.
Right. It just doesn't sound...
It doesn't sound like... Yeah, true.
It doesn't sound like him.
Now, the interesting thing about Yule Swinney, though, is that even though they couldn't get him for the murders, obviously, but he was a car thief. And because at the time in the state, they had a law where if you had so many offenses, they could put you in jail for life. So they did.
They did have like a three strikes you're out type.
Yes, similar type of thing. So he had stolen so many cars and committed so many other crimes that they said, okay, well, we'll just put him in prison for that. He was actually in prison until 1973. So they let him out on appeal because they determined in the original trial he hadn't gotten, adequate representation or whatever. After he was let out, he was actually in and out of prison for quite a while after that, 16, just minor offenses, mostly car theft, robbery, that type of thing.
So and he didn't change his ways after all that time.
So they actually finally let him out on parole in 1989 when he was about 72 years old.
Damn.
And he died about 5 years later in a nursing home. So he has passed away since then. So whether he was the Phantom Killer or not, no one will ever know. Now, here is a weird little thing, and I don't know. Here was another suspect, and this is kind of creepy. This happened a couple years later. This was November 5th, 1948. And there was this guy named Duty Tennyson.
Okay.
That was his nickname.
Duty.
His real name was Henry Tennyson, but he let people call him Duty for whatever reason. It's like Grease. But he killed himself. Yeah. He was a student at the University of Arkansas. He actually poisoned himself with rat poison. And here was the creepy thing. They found like this little, like a lockbox. And he had this little poem that told them how to open the lockbox and everything. The police were like, fuck that. They just, broke it and opened it. And inside, there was a letter. There was a Viewmaster with a bunch of little reels of Mexico. Uh-huh. And then there was a letter that said, "To whom it may concern, this is my last word to you fine people, and you are fine. I want to thank you for all the trouble that you've gone to send me to college and to bring me up. You have been really wonderful. Why did I take my own life? Well, when you committed 2 double murders, you would too. Yes, I did kill Betty Jo Booker and Paul Martin in the city park that night, and killed Mr. Starks and tried to get Mrs. Starks. You wouldn't have guessed it. I did it when Mother was either out or asleep, and no one saw me do it. For the guns, I disassembled them and discarded them in different places. When I am found, which has already been done, Please give this typewriter to Craig, who is his brother, and tell him that I hope his child is a boy. It will help him in his work. Everything can go wherever you think it will do best, except for the Viewmaster, which will go to Belva Jo, who was the daughter of his landlady. Please take my bankroll and give it to Daddy. I think it should go to him and tell him I don't want the car now. Goodbye, everybody. See you sometime. If I make the grade, which will be hard for me to make. He had also written, like, fake newspaper headlines about his suicide. Like, he had practiced.
Right, yeah.
This was, like, the final... He had typed this note.
Yeah.
But they found, like, written drafts of it.
Yeah. I don't believe it.
Now, it should be noted that he died in 1948.
Okay.
He was 18.
You're right, yeah.
Which meant that he would have only been 16 when he committed, which is possible,
He's
but
fantasizing.
unlikely.
He's fantasizing. He's fantasizing. He's grandstanding and fantasizing. He's killing himself for an imagined fantasy crime. You know how they have those guys that like to commit or like to confess to crimes that they didn't commit? Yeah. That's what he's doing. He's one of those guys.
And honestly, like, after that all happened and they found this note and they're like, what the hell? He had a friend from Texarkana named James Freeman. He came forward and talked to the police and he's like, look, on the night of this, that, and the other murder, me and him were hanging out. We were playing cards at my house. It's like he didn't kill those people. Right. So no one knows. That was just kind of a creepy little footnote. Now, let me talk a little bit. Let me go a little bit into The Town That Dreaded Sundown. Now, I've seen the original. It was many years ago. I have not seen the remake, which is actually, the remake is actually kind of a meta thing because, see, the town of Texarkana in real life, every year on Halloween, they show The Town That Dreaded Sundown. Right. I believe it's in Spring Lake Park where some of the victims were found, which to me, it's like kind of morbid, but also kind of awesome that they do that. Okay. I mean, that's kind of creepy. Yeah. But because those people are dead and like that's weird. Yeah. But, you know, they're kind of excited that a movie was made about in their town, I guess. So I think it's ridiculous. Yeah. So they're just going to show that movie every year, like in a big outdoor festival. So apparently the remake has a killer getting the idea from the film festival. Now they're going to come back in the modern age and kill the people or whatever.
Now, the guy who made that movie, that was the same guy who did the Sasquatch movie, wasn't it?
Yeah, I said that earlier. He did Legend of Boggy Creek.
Yeah, Legend of Boggy Creek.
And Legend of Boggy Creek 2, which is actually one of my favorite Mystery Science Theater episodes. Oh my God, that was terrible. Pants. And he's actually in it. Charles B. Pierce is in... Actually, he's in Town That Dreaded Sundown, too. Yeah. He plays a small part. He plays like a cop.
Swear to God, that was... Him making those movies is the only times he ever hung out with girls. You know that? he had.
Do you know what's interesting, though?
What's that?
That Charles B. Pierce, when he made The Town That Dreaded Sundown, his girlfriend at the time was the girl that played the Betty Jo Booker character. Oh, I didn't know. Girl that got killed with the stabby trombone, which didn't really happen. Yeah. And it's sad because that movie came out, and like I said, it was more or less accurate. Yeah. But the thing about the trombone that was in the movie, like, I think a lot of people think that was how Betty Jo Booker was killed. And no, like I said, they didn't even find her saxophone until months after she died. They found it like in a field somewhere, like, and it was still in the case. Right. So, you know, obviously the killer just taken it and thrown it over a fence someplace, which, you know, that kind of negates the whole guy that came into a pawn shop saying I have an alto saxophone, because they found it a lot later. So, like I said, the movie, they changed all the victims' names. Which, you know, fair enough, they can do that. But a lot of the stuff, the trombone was inaccurate. Everybody in the town freaking out about, like, the second murder, that was inaccurate. It didn't really happen until after the third series of murders, like right before the Virgil Starks murders. Then everybody started freaking out. Then they did the curfew. Everyone stopped going out at night and all this other stuff. So that happened much later. There was, I think in the movie, there was a scene, too, during the Starks attack where the police actually saw the perpetrator and like chased him, and that didn't happen either. He was long gone by the time the cops got there. So, you know, the movie, it's pretty accurate on its face, but, you know, there are some little things. And it's sad because it's fine that they made a movie about it, but the fact that they made a movie about it kind of tainted a lot of the actual details of the case, too. And it became part of the mythology of the Phantom Killer. Like I said, really the only person that got a good look at him was Mary Jean Larry, the first victim who didn't die.
And he had a sack over his
head. And she couldn't even really tell. She's like, he, you know, could have been a tan white guy, could have been a light-skinned black man.
She didn't know the race.
She didn't even know what race it was. So she didn't get that good a look at him. No one did. So she was the only one that saw him. And that's where the whole mythology of the guy with it. And I think even, you know, in Friday the 13th Part 2, where you first see Jason, before he has the hockey mask and he has the bag over his head. Right. That might have been inspired by this case. Because it does kind of remind me of that. Now, before we end, I actually want to talk a little bit about Virginia Carpenter. Because she's not usually added to the canonical victims because they never found her. She's just classified as a disappearance.
Right, yeah.
I mean, assuming that she was murdered. But the interesting thing about Virginia Carpenter is that she was from Texarkana and she knew 3 of the victims. So it seemed odd that she turned up missing later on, presumably murdered. Now, this was actually a couple of years later. This was in 1948. She was originally from Texarkana, but she was actually going to the Texas State College for Women, which was in Denton. So she was taking a train to the campus. Now, on the train, she met up with another girl named Marjorie, who was also going to the same place. And, they were both going to be living on the campus in different dormitories. So they get off the train, they share a cab. Now the cab driver, Edgar Ray Zachary, he's kind of the last person that saw her alive that they know of. So they get to the campus and she's like, oh crap, I forgot to check and see like when my trunk was coming in, can you take me back to the train station? So Marjorie, who was the other girl that she met on the train, she says, well, I can come back with you. And she's like, no, it's fine. So Marjorie gets out, she goes to her dormitory. Virginia goes back to the train station. They say, oh, your trunk's not going to come until tomorrow. So then Edgar drives her back to the campus and she says, okay, well, can you drive to the, she's like, I'll pay you X amount of dollars, drive back to the train station tomorrow, pick up my trunk and then bring it back and just leave it in the front office of the dorm and I'll pick it up. So he says, fine. Now he says that she gets out of the cab and she has a couple suitcases with her. She says there's 2 guys in a yellow or a cream colored convertible and they're parked on the curb a little way up from the cab. And he says, now she seemed to know who they were. He's like, I distinctly heard her say, what are y'all doing here? And they kind of hail her of hey, what's up? Right. And so she goes over and talks to them. And then she says to Edgar, she's like, oh, they'll get my bags. It's fine. Now he couldn't really get a good look at them because he said, it was dark out. There was no moon. There was the street lights were out. They were being repaired at the time. So he's like, well, one of them was kind of tall and thin. One was short and fat. That's about all I can tell you. But, these were the last people that had been seen with her. Now, after that, she disappeared. So days go by. Edgar actually did go the next day and he picked up her trunk from the train station. He brought it back to the dorm. He didn't take it to her room, though. He actually left it on the lawn. Right. Maybe he didn't want to go inside or he thought it was too much trouble or whatever. He just left it on the lawn and then took off. The suitcase sat there for 2 days. And then finally someone said, oh, maybe we should take that to the office. They took that to the office. So then Virginia's boyfriend is like, I haven't heard from her for 3 or 4 days. So he calls her mom and her mom calls the school. School says she never came here. She was supposed to come register for classes. She never showed up. So the weird thing about this is that even though we're presuming that she disappeared on the last night she was seen. And maybe it was one of these 2 guys in the yellow or cream colored convertible.
She's never been found, huh?
No, they had never found her. And the sad thing is that, they interviewed the boyfriend. It wasn't him. He lived far away anyway. Right. But the creepy thing is that some people claimed that they saw her in the ensuing days. Now, they don't think she was in any particular trouble. It's she was very excited to start school. She wanted to be a lab technician. She'd actually wanted to be a nurse. She was always, or a doctor. She was very interested in the sciences, but she had a condition where one of her legs was shorter than the other. I presume she had polio when she was a child. So she couldn't stand on her feet for long periods of time. So she couldn't really be a nurse because, you know, you kind of have to be able to stand up for a long time. So she's like, well, I'll just be a lab tech, same kind of thing. So that's what she was going to college to be. She was very excited about it. She'd had a medical exam not long before. She wasn't pregnant or anything like that. So there was no reason for her to voluntarily disappear, is what they're saying.
But there's also no real hard link between her and this other case.
Now, the only thing that they think is interesting about it, like I said, is that she was originally from Texarkana and that she was friends with 3 of the victims. No. So she does kind of sometimes get linked in with this case because they're saying maybe the person that did those crimes later targeted her because she knew something or something like that. In the ensuing days, some people claimed that they saw her. They said, one guy at a service station said, oh, I saw somebody that looked like her.
Places like Texarkana back in those days, though, everybody knew everybody. I mean, they all went to school together. That really doesn't mean anything.
I'm just saying, this is a case that comes up as kind of associated. Right. Because it just seemed weird that she was from there and she had known them. Yeah. And then a couple years later, she disappeared also.
There's some towns in Mississippi, small cities in Mississippi where pretty much everybody knows everybody in one way or another.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
But yeah, so like I said, they've never figured out what happened to Virginia Carpenter. I mean,
somebody killed her.
Yeah, obviously. You know, like I said, there were some sightings of her afterward. You know, somebody at a bus station in DeQueen, Arkansas said, yeah, I saw a girl that looked just like her. She was getting off a bus from Texarkana. She met a young man who had sandy hair. She left with him. And then she said a few minutes after they left, somebody called the bus station and asked for her. Which I don't know if that's true or not, but that's pretty weird if that's true. In 1955, which was 7 years after she disappeared, they declared her dead so that they could, you know, do whatever they had to do. Now, 4 years after that, in 1959, there was, police came across, I'm not really sure, I don't know if it was a tip or something like that, but they found, like, in this old abandoned farm in Jefferson, Texas, they found some human bones. Now, the farm was abandoned, but they contacted the family who had lived there at the time, and they're like, what's with these bones that we found on your land? And they said, oh, our son was a medical student, so we went and dug up some bones from the local black cemetery, because I guess that's a cool thing you could do.
You could do that back then, yeah.
I guess. Whatever, because it's like, oh, he was studying biology, and he wanted a skeleton.
Needed bones, yeah.
Because, you know.
Probably bullshit, though. How would you bet it didn't
happen? That's the thing. That's what they said. But then when they tested the bones, they said, no, this is a white woman with one leg shorter than the other.
There you go.
So initially they thought it was Virginia Carpenter, but then the dental records did not match. So it wasn't her. Weird. So isn't that weird though? How they found like another skeleton? I don't even know if they ever determined who that skeleton was. But it wasn't her. So many
murders.
I know, that's what I'm saying. But it wasn't her. So the case is unsolved. Now, I should note that in 1998, police received an anonymous tip that, oh, there were two guys and they raped and murdered Virginia and they buried her near a dam, like that was right near the college campus from which she disappeared. Now, police did investigate this lead. They dug up all the area around the dam, but they didn't find anything. And they said, now, both of the people, they did, you know, not in the media, but this person did name to the police who the suspects were, but both of them were dead.
Right.
So there was no way they could check up on
That's a problem with cases this old. You're never going to find these people. They're all dead.
Right. And that's the problem. And that's kind of the sad thing. And like I said, it's something that's kind of... It's kind of bothering me a little bit as I'm researching all these cases is that
the next of kin
even
are all
if they
dead,
did find out who did this, they're probably dead by now. Or they're like in their 70s or 80s, just like the Golden State Killer.
Right.
It's like how much justice can be served by, you know, he's lived his whole life a free man, and it's the same kind of thing. And they did actually reopen a lot of the investigations, but they had to close them because pretty much everybody was dead. All the witnesses were dead. All the suspects were dead.
The plaintiffs.
And it's like they're never going to solve it.
Descendants and relatives of the victims are dead.
So it's kind of a shame. And it's kind of the same thing that happened, you know, with the Virginia Carpenter case.
Time conquers all.
Yeah. And with the Phantom Killer case, it's like, you know, at this stage, are they ever going to solve it? Because most of the people involved are dead. And that's pretty sad. But anyway, we've gone on and on like we usually do.
Yeah.
But now we've reached the end of the show. I hope you guys enjoyed our kind of ramshackle discussion. Remember, if you like the show, to like, share, and subscribe with all your friends. Share on all your social media. If you'd like to financially support the show, please go to our Patreon, which is patreon.com/13o'clockpodcast. Or go to our blog, which is 13o'clockpodcast.wordpress.com. And there's a link in the sidebar to a PayPal account if you'd like to give a one-time donation. That would be very much appreciated. Also, remember to check out our Zazzle store at zazzle.com/13o'clock. And there are shirts and a tote bag there that you can purchase if you wish. And also check out our latest movie review, which was Tourist Trap, if you haven't seen it. And that will do it for episode 95 about the Phantom Killer. We will see you next time. Bye.
That's